He slept with my wife, then used my company to hide his scam. What was the best revenge you've ever gotten? I had a large web hosting company somewhere in Europe in the late 1990s. Back then, the internet still felt like the Wild West. Everything was growing insanely fast, and if you were in the right place at the right time, business could explode almost overnight. That was what happened to us. My wife worked with me at the company. It was not some distant thing where I ran the business and she only heard about it at dinner. She was there. She saw the stress, the growth, the customers, the long nights, all of it. Business was booming. With a small team, we were signing on thousands of new customers every week. Thousands every week. 16-hour workdays were no exception for either of us. We were exhausted most of the time, but there was also this feeling that we were building something enormous, something that could change our lives. And it did. We were negotiating a takeover of the company, and because of that, we were instructed not to hire extra people in the meantime. So even though the workload was ridiculous, we just kept pushing through it. Then suddenly, I managed to sell my company. Just like that, everything changed. We were millionaires instantly. Well, technically, I was the millionaire. It was my company. But after 10 years together, after all the work and stress and sacrifice, it felt like something we had lived through together. Part of the deal was that I would stay on for another year to hand things over properly. The new management came in and immediately put an end to the 16-hour workdays. They hired lots and lots of extra staff. Suddenly there were new people everywhere. New departments, new routines, new management, new energy. I worked mainly from home after that. My wife continued working at the company. And that was where things started to change. After work, there was always a lot of partying. The company had grown, the pressure had lifted, there were more people around, and everyone seemed to be celebrating all the time. Somewhere in the middle of all that, my wife hooked up with a guy who worked in our financial department. Let's call him Peter. One day, she confessed to me that she had slept with Peter the night before. I do not think there is a graceful way to hear something like that. You can imagine yourself reacting with dignity. You can imagine yourself staying calm. But when the person you have been with for 10 years looks at you and says something like that, it does something to the room. The air changes. Still, we decided we did not want this to destroy 10 years of us being together. So we agreed to try. We agreed to go to therapy. We agreed to work on our issues. We agreed that maybe this was something broken between us that could still be repaired. And because I was trying very hard to be reasonable, I decided to call Peter over to my house. He was 10 years younger than I was. I asked him if he enjoyed his job. He said he did. I asked him if he wanted to keep it. He definitely did. So I told him that my wife and I were going to try to work things out, and I asked him to keep his distance while we did that. That was all. I did not threaten him, I did not make a scene, I did not try to destroy him on the spot. I asked him to keep his distance. He promised me he would. And since I was leaving the company soon anyway, I let him keep his job in return. We went to therapy, not once or twice but countless sessions. We talked, we argued. We tried to understand what had happened and whether there was anything left worth saving. For a while, I really did try. But to make a long story short, Peter did not stick to his promise. When I found out, I filed for divorce. Because at that point there was no mystery left. It takes two to party and my marriage was over. But I also had a little score to settle with my friend Peter. So I called the new director of my former company and asked him to fire Peter. He told me he would not do that. And the frustrating thing was he could say no. I was no longer the owner. I was no longer the person calling the shots. The company had been sold. I had money, yes, but inside that building I no longer had power. So I was basically empty-handed. At least for the moment. About a year later, I noticed something strange. Some domain names had been registered to my private holding company. Without my consent. That immediately caught my attention because this was not a small clerical detail. My private holding company was mine. Its credentials were not something random employees should be using. So I started looking into it. After some investigation, I found out that our friend Peter had been registering domain names that had been canceled by customers of my former company. These were customers who had decided to cancel their domain names with the web host, and Peter was taking those canceled names and registering them again. But he was not doing it under his own name. He was using my private company credentials. Back then, in our country, you needed a company to register a national domain name. So Peter used my company details to make the registrations possible. And the reason was obvious. If anyone noticed, it would not look like an employee of their former web host had taken ownership of their domain name after they canceled it. It would look like my private holding company had done it. So Peter could quietly take the names, sell them for profit, and keep himself out of sight. That was too nice to pass up. Because now this was not just personal. This was not just about my marriage anymore. Peter had used my private company credentials without my consent. He had involved my name, my company, and my reputation in his little side business. So I called the director again. I explained what I had found. And again, I asked him to fire Peter. He still refused. That was when I called some journalists. And let me tell you, journalists were very eager to write about this little scandal. A web hosting employee registering canceled customer domain names for profit, while hiding behind someone else's private company credentials. That was a story. Once the press became interested, the new owner of the company had no real option left. Peter was fired. It took me over a year, but I finally made him keep his end of the deal. And my former wife's. That part is almost too perfect. It turned out Peter had a gambling addiction. He took her with him to a casino most evenings, and since she had very little to do there, she started talking to the guy who exchanged coins for the slot machines. They fell in love. They are still together.